There are moments in history that change a nation. And then, there are moments that refuse to be explained. November 22, 1963. Began like any other Friday. The sun was shining over Dallas, Texas. Thousands of Americans lined the streets, smiling, waving, and hoping to catch a glimpse of the young president they admired. Children sat on their parents' shoulders. Office workers crowded the windows. Camera shutters clicked. Everything looked ordinary. Until, in less than 10 seconds, 3 gunshots shattered the silence. The President of the United States collapsed inside his limousine. Millions would later watch the horrifying images again and again. But what happened next is what turned a national tragedy into one of history's greatest mysteries. The man accused of pulling the trigger would never stand trial. Witnesses remembered different things. Investigators raced to piece together the evidence. And for more than 60 years, one question has refused to disappear. What really happened on America's darkest day? Was the official investigation correct? Or did the events of that afternoon leave behind questions that history still cannot fully answer? In this video, we're going back to November 22, 1963. Minute by minute. Following the timeline, examining the evidence, and separating verified facts from decades of speculation. To understand why this single day continues to haunt America more than half a century later. The morning of November 22, 1963, began with optimism. President John F. Kennedy had arrived in Texas as part of a political tour ahead of the next presidential election. Despite political tensions in the state, the atmosphere that Friday morning was surprisingly warm. Crowds gathered hours before the presidential motorcade was scheduled to pass. Families brought their children. Students skipped class for a chance to witness history. Office workers leaned from windows, hoping for a better view. Dallas had decorated itself for the occasion. American flags fluttered in the breeze, cameras flashed from every corner, and police officers lined the streets to keep the route secure. No one standing along those sidewalks could have imagined they were about to witness one of the most tragic moments in American history. Shortly before noon, Air Force One landed at Love Field Airport. As President Kennedy stepped onto the runway with First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy, they were greeted by enthusiastic supporters. The president smiled, shook hands with members of the crowd, and appeared relaxed. Witnesses later recalled that he seemed unusually cheerful that morning, taking extra time to greet people despite the tight schedule. After leaving the airport, the presidential limousine began its journey through Dallas. The route had been carefully planned to maximize public visibility before the president's luncheon speech. Riding alongside the president were Texas Governor John Connally and his wife, while Secret Service agents followed closely behind. The motorcade moved slowly through downtown streets as thousands of spectators waved and cheered. Children held tiny American flags. Adults raised cameras, hoping to capture a photograph of the young president whose charisma had inspired millions across the country. Everything appeared perfectly normal. No signs of danger. No visible panic. Just another presidential visit on a bright autumn afternoon. But as the motorcade approached a place known as Dealey Plaza, history was only moments away from changing forever. At approximately 12:30 p.m., the presidential motorcade turned into Dealey Plaza. The limousine slowed as it rounded a sharp corner, giving the thousands of spectators an even better view of President Kennedy and the First Lady. People waved enthusiastically, smiling as cameras captured what seemed like another joyful moment. Then, everything changed. A loud crack echoed through the plaza. For a brief second, many people thought it was a firecracker. Others looked around in confusion, trying to understand where the sound had come from. Before anyone could react, more shots rang out. Panic spread instantly. Witnesses screamed and dropped to the ground. Parents pulled their children to safety. Some ran toward nearby buildings, while others rushed toward a grassy hill, believing the shots had come from that direction. The once celebratory atmosphere turned into complete chaos in a matter of seconds. Inside the limousine, Secret Service agent Clint Hill sprinted toward the moving vehicle, climbing onto the back as the driver accelerated away from Dealey Plaza. Governor John Connally had also been seriously wounded, and Jacqueline Kennedy desperately tried to stay beside her husband as the motorcade raced toward Parkland Memorial Hospital. Doctors were already waiting when the president arrived. A team of specialists worked frantically, doing everything they could to save his life. But the injuries were too severe. Just 30 minutes after the shooting, President John F. Kennedy was pronounced dead. The news spread with astonishing speed. Radio stations interrupted their broadcasts. Television networks abandoned regular programming. Across America, businesses fell silent, schools dismissed. Students and families gathered around their televisions in disbelief. In less than 10 seconds, the United States had lost its president, and the course of American history had changed forever. As doctors fought to save President Kennedy's life at Parkland Memorial Hospital, another race had already begun across Dallas. Police officers flooded the streets, sealed off key locations, and searched for anyone connected to the attack. Witnesses pointed investigators toward the Texas School Book Depository, a 7-story building overlooking Dealey Plaza. Employees were questioned, and officers quickly began searching the upper floors. On the 6th floor, investigators discovered a rifle near a window along with spent cartridge cases. It immediately became the center of the investigation. Detectives worked to identify who had been in that area during the shooting. Attention soon focused on one employee, Lee Harvey Oswald, a 24-year-old former U.S. Marine who had recently started working at the depository. But before police could question him, another shocking event unfolded. Less than an hour after the assassination, Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit was shot and killed in a residential neighborhood. Witnesses described a man matching Oswald's appearance leaving the scene. A citywide manhunt intensified, with officers racing through streets, businesses, and neighborhoods. That afternoon, police received reports of a suspicious man hiding inside the Texas Theater. Without knowing exactly what they would find, officers surrounded the building and quietly entered the dark auditorium. Moments later, they confronted Oswald. A struggle broke out as officers attempted to arrest him. According to police, Oswald resisted and allegedly tried to fire a handgun before being overpowered. He was taken into custody and charged with the murder of Officer Tippit, and soon afterward, with the assassination of President Kennedy. The arrest made headlines around the world. Yet even with a suspect in custody, the biggest questions remained unanswered. Who exactly was Lee Harvey Oswald? Did he truly act alone, as investigators would later conclude? Or was this only the beginning of a mystery that would challenge historians and investigators for generations? Just 2 days after President Kennedy's assassination, the world witnessed another unbelievable moment. On November 24, 1963, millions of Americans were watching live television as Lee Harvey Oswald was being transferred from the Dallas City Jail to a county facility. Reporters crowded the basement, cameras rolled, and police believed the transfer would be routine. Then, without warning, a local nightclub owner named Jack Ruby stepped out of the crowd. A single gunshot echoed through the building. Oswald collapsed to the floor, critically wounded. He was rushed to the very same hospital where President Kennedy had been taken just 2 days earlier. Within hours, he was dead. The only man officially accused of assassinating the president would never testify in court. His death immediately fueled even more questions. Why had Jack Ruby killed Oswald? Was it an emotional act by a grieving citizen, as Ruby claimed? Or had the nation lost its only chance to hear the full story? In the months that followed, the Warren Commission conducted a massive investigation, reviewing thousands of documents, interviewing hundreds of witnesses, and examining the available physical evidence. In 1964, it concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in assassinating President John F. Kennedy. But for many Americans, the questions never disappeared. Over the decades, historians, journalists, and independent researchers have continued to study the case. New government records have been released, old evidence has been re-examined, and countless books and documentaries have explored every detail. While no alternative explanation has been proven strongly enough to replace the official conclusion, the debate has never truly ended. Perhaps that is why November 22, 1963, remains America's darkest day. Not only because a president was lost, but because the search for complete certainty never ended. More than 60 years later, visitors still stand in Dealey Plaza, looking at the same streets, the same buildings, and the same window, asking the very question that has echoed through generations. What really happened on America's darkest day? Maybe history has already given us its answer. Or maybe some mysteries are destined to remain a part of history forever.